US President Donald Trump and his wife Melania are in Beijing on a 3-day visit. Earlier this afternoon, they arrived to a red carpet welcome, State Visit Plus, as his Chinese hosts describe it. Trump is staying at the very plush St. Regis Hotel near Tiananmen Square. He was personally escorted by President Xi Jinping on a tour through the Forbidden City to be followed by talks and a private dinner. For China, this visit is the first since the 19th Party Congress saw President Xi Jinping emerge as the most powerful leader since Chairman Mao. And they would like Trump to acknowledge that by endorsing Xi's idea of a new type of great power relations. It means Washington agrees to share the global spotlight with a resurgent China. This visit could be Xi's golden opportunity to turbocharge China's drive for great power status and win Trump's blessing for his political vision. But there are risks in the Chinese strategy. Trump has been a vocal critic of China's trade practices. During his election campaign, he called China a currency manipulator. He accused China of stealing American jobs. He will demand an end to America's embarrassing $347 billion trade deficit with China. But action on any of these demands China's cooperation. Add to that the US business community in China, which is hugely invested in that country. After the 19th Party Congress, Xi Jinping seems at an advantage. He calls the shots in Beijing. In contrast, Trump appears vulnerable given the Mueller probe findings into Russia's meddling in the American presidential election. His popularity ratings have fallen steeply and his administration is seen to lack coherence and direction. He's blown hot and cold on North Korea and wants China to do more on Pyongyang's saber-rattling. But China will want its pound of flesh. That's the challenge for Donald Trump as he sits down to talk with Xi Jinping. And these developments are very, very significant for India. And the big question for India as China's President Xi Jinping toasts his guest, America's Donald Trump, in Beijing. Could Trump dilute the understanding on key issues arrived at in the last couple of months between Delhi and Washington? Let's look at where India and the US are today on regional security and economic issues. The US recognizes India as a key player in the Indo-Pacific. It means both countries oppose China's muscle flexing in the South China Sea. Both countries see the China-driven Belt and Road Initiative as lacking sustainability and transparency. Both countries are working in common purposes in Afghanistan, which means fighting the Taliban. They oppose terrorism and terror sanctuaries in countries like Pakistan. And these points were reiterated last month when US Secretary of State Rex Tillerson visited New Delhi. Could Donald Trump overturn all this as he courts Chinese investment to boost jobs in America, reduce the $350 billion trade deficit and enlist China's help in talking to North Korea? Or taking on North Korea, more like. China may say yes, but could demand a steep price. Recognition by the US that China is also a great power. That would fit in with President Xi's concept of great power relations. It basically means the world is bipolar. China and the US should share global leadership as equals. This would break the pattern of conflict between established and rising powers. The idea was rejected, remember, by the Obama administration since it was clearly intended to ensure China a sphere of influence in Asia. But could Trump bite at the offer if his other concerns are addressed by the Chinese? That's a question that will be very difficult to answer at this point. The betting is he will not, in fact, given that it will confirm a perception that the US is withdrawing from Asia. That Trump is unpredictable and his transactional approach to foreign policy has led India to shore up relations in other areas. It is building up ties with middle powers like Japan. It is a key participant in the Malabar Trilateral involving the US and Japan. The trilateral is now expanding to a quad to include Australia. India is shoring up ties with old friend Russia as well. South Bloc will carefully monitor any reference to India or South Asia during or after the Trump visit. In that sense, any references to Afghanistan which are contrary to the understanding India and the US have would be a setback. India would also prefer the US not back away from its criticism over China's Belt and Road Initiative, nor relent from its standoff of countering China in the South China Sea. So a lot of issues to be dealt with. Let's go straight to our panel. Gabriel Battaglia is a journalist with us from Beijing. Jaydev Ranade, President at the Center for China Analysis and Studies, with us from New Delhi. Atul Aneja, China correspondent of The Hindu, with us from Beijing. Arturo Martinez, he's a journalist. He works for The Voice of America, joining us from Washington. We will be joined by Jonathan Landay, national security correspondent of Thomson Reuters from Washington in just a bit. Good evening to all of you. Gabriel, let me begin with you. The big headline was, is Donald Trump going to be able to breach the Chinese firewall to tweet? It seems he has.
Yes, he's tweeting. He's just tweeted 3 times. Last time 2 minutes ago, and he's very happy because of the lavish banquet that Xi Jinping provided to him. So he's saying, looking forward to a full day of meetings with President Xi and our delegations tomorrow. Thank you in caps letters for the beautiful welcome, China. So he looks very happy for this welcoming party that he had today at the Forbidden City, which is being closed for the occasion.
Arturo, what is State Visit Plus?
They want to be speaking about North Korea tensions within North Korea. Even during his visit previously to South Korea at the parliament, he was already urging China to take further action against the North Korean regime. Also, trade politics are likely to be talked about during his visit.
He's the first U.S. leader to dine in the Forbidden City since the founding of modern China. How significant is that? Much is being made about it.
It's a big symbolic step for Donald Trump as well as for China. Also, it's small detail is that they presented a red carpet for Mr. Trump and his wife Melania Trump. Last visit was from ex-President Barack Obama, and they were not displaying a red carpet and such symbolic things. So it's a welcoming symbol for the new president of the United States.
Atul Aneja, actually, that was a question for you. Why is it so significant? What is the cultural significance of a foreign leader dining in the Forbidden City?
Well, the significance is there because Forbidden City used to be the seat of power of the Chinese emperors. So it has a pristine Chinese civilizational ambience to it. And by welcoming Donald Trump as part of this welcome, the plus category which they have used, welcome with a plus, I think this is part of it, that you are being treated as best as possible the Chinese can offer. This is special treatment for you. You are being taken into civilizational China. And I think that is going down very well with what responses have been coming from Mr. Trump himself. I think the Chinese are investing very heavily in a personal relationship between President Xi Jinping and President Trump. And I think the calculation is, or the thinking is, that if this rapport, which is already there because of the earlier meetings in Mar-a-Lago and thereafter at the Hamburg G20 summit, along with the telephone calls, that if this relationship builds up and the personal chemistry builds up to quote-unquote a friendship, then that would be the key to resolve many of the thorny questions which you had referred in your introductory remarks. So I think the route to resolving the bigger issues, which will not be discussed, as I understand, in any kind of detail now, is to have this personal relationship. And to have that kind of personal relationship was this very special welcome. And so you're going out of your way to welcome Mr. Trump. And second thing is also, I think they have understood Trump's personality quite well. That he likes to be treated, it flatters his ego in a way. Because the Chinese would have watched what happened, let's say, in Saudi Arabia, where the Saudis welcomed him with a sword dance and a very elaborate 50 heads of government all from the Arab world. And you see that seemed to have worked on Trump. And even today, while he was visiting China, he did make a reference to the Saudi-Iran kind of tensions back in Saudi Arabia. So the Chinese have realized that there is vanity here in the personality of Mr. Trump. And they're playing very, very, very strongly to that in a very focused way. That once this gets through, then that sort of opens up possibilities of a resolution of many thorny issues in a manner which are not hostile to you, or at least equitably sort of resolved, rather than what we saw was the attitude of Trump, which you mentioned during his election campaign. So I think the personal chemistry is the key, and the welcome was part of that to establish a very special personal bond between President Xi and President Trump.
To that extent, President Xi may have succeeded. Jaydev, one of the Chinese papers, as Atul also pointed out, said, and I'm quoting, Trump is a president who loves to be flattered and the Chinese know how to flatter. Is that what's happening? To avoid the thorny issues, the Chinese are going out of their way?
Precisely. Actually, that's the word I was going to use. They know that they need to flatter Trump. They've been doing it for a while. They operated through his family for the first summit between Xi and Trump, which was organized by Yang Jiechi, who has, of course, continued in the Central Committee now, this time as a reward. But what they have done is pulled out all the stops to welcome Trump, to flatter his ego, and therefore they have taken him to Chungnanhai for dinner, making it very clear that this is something that has not been done earlier. I think there are two other points that we need to take note of here, that the personal chemistry can be overstated. The Chinese are approaching this in a very cold and calculated manner. As far as they're concerned, they're also looking at the economic incentives that they can give to the United States. And so far, I think from what I hear, there are negotiations totaling over $14 to $15 billion that are on the anvil, and a lot of them will translate into jobs in the United States and Texas and the Midwest. Interestingly, the Xinhua, which is the official Chinese news agency, also put out a couple of days ago that by 2016, the Chinese had invested $20 billion in the United States, giving the United States 45,000 jobs. So I think they're making it very clear that this is a very important relationship in economic terms, and that Trump needs to be sensitive to that. And here I will add two more points. One, that they have also spoken, of course, about the major type of big power relationship, thereby trying to put themselves on the same level as the United States. But as far as North Korea is concerned, they made a very important point, very quietly, that Trump did not visit the DMZ or the DMZ, thereby working towards reducing tensions rather than going by his earlier statements, and that the North Koreans have also not chosen to escalate matters by having a missile launch. So I think the Chinese are making it clear that A, they still have a role on the North Korean issue, and secondly, that Trump is pulling back, at least so far as the Chinese can make out. So I think it's an important visit. There are many important points that are coming out here, but the main thing is their focus on Trump.
Jonathan Lanty, good evening. Good to have you on the show. There are a lot of pending issues, sticking points, if you may, between the US and China. Even if you were to discount what other countries expect from the American president, there's the issue of forced tech transfers, blocking US internet firms, Chinese aid to North Korea. One day gone, none of this was brought up, I understand.
We have to wait and see. Today was just a welcoming ceremony for Mr. Trump, a very flattering welcoming ceremony. He and President Xi get down to business tomorrow. We'll have to wait and see what transpires. We expect a major announcement on what expected to be memos of understanding, memorandums of understanding on potential trade deals, or business deals, I should say, between American and Chinese companies. But memorandums of understanding are not trade agreements. And as far as we can tell, there has been no major work done prior to this visit on trying to put together some kind of trade agreement that would overcome serious barriers or serious problems between the United States and China in terms of trade, China's massive trade deficit with the United States. Mr. Trump himself has been highly critical of that, even as he goes on to develop this very personal relationship with President Xi. The United States, the Trump administration has a number of trade investigations going on into China, including a possibility of imposing restrictions on Chinese investments for national security reasons in the United States. There are also investigations into Chinese alleged theft of American intellectual property rights, and there may be there's an investigation into potential Chinese dumping of solar panels in the United States. So despite the fact that we're going to hear this big announcement of memorandums of understanding that we tomorrow from President Xi and President Trump, there are still numerous frictions both on the trade front and, of course, in the security realm as well, where you have the Chinese claim of sovereignty over the South China Sea and surrounding waters, et cetera, and then North Korea. Now, just ahead of Mr. President Trump's arrival, we're hearing that Chinese local officials have stopped tours of Chinese citizens into North Korea. That we'll wait to see how long that will exist for, how long that will stay in place. But whether or not China will move aggressively to clamp down on trade with North Korea, which it accounts for 90% of, we'll have to wait and see.
Absolutely. Atul and Asia, very quickly, I want to ask you, how should India be looking at these developments, this sudden bonhomie between Xi and Trump? Is this just an act for the shutterbugs, or is there more to it?
I think India should look with great realism at what is happening between Trump and Xi Jinping. This seems to be, frankly, it is still a lot of flux, this relationship between Xi and Trump, and as it unfolds, there are a number of gray areas yet to be done. But I think it's very important to understand the influences on Trump. I see three. One is, of course, those who want greater market access in China, and that's one lobby. The second is the national security people who are formulating the Indo-Pacific doctrine of Australia, India, Japan, and the US together. But I think the most important influence on Trump right now is of Jared Kushner and the people around him. And he is the one who really wants a very a relationship of partnership, in fact, with China. But I think that is a dominant influence. We have to see how these three parallel influences impinge on him, and how does Mr. Trump respond to that? I think India has to watch that very carefully.
Indeed, and this is something that we will discuss in detail in the days ahead as well. I would have liked to bring it up with Jaydev perhaps, but I'm running out of time. Very quickly, if I could have a reaction, Jaydev. Xi Jinping comes from a position of power, and he's dealing with a president who is embroiled in an election scandal, and who cannot really steer his ship in one direction, it seems.
Yes, Xi Jinping is conscious of that, and he's going to try and muscle out as much as he can from Trump. But I think Trump will also keep in mind the fact that it has been the tradition of at least the past few US presidents to state in their national security doctrine that they will ensure that America remains the preeminent world power. And if that is his intention, then he's not going to be in a mood to accede to the great power, new type of great power relationship that puts China on par with the United States. He's also probably going to be unwilling to concede space in the South China Sea. So let's see what happens. I think it's at an interesting juncture, but it's still too early to say that the Chinese will get their way.
Right. It's Xi Jinping and Donald Trump's third meeting, the first on Chinese soil. Thank you very much, Gabriel, Jaydev, Atul, Arturo, and Jonathan. Appreciate you all joining us.